Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight we're going to explore one of history's darkest chapters, the brutal reality of being a Viking slave. You're about to experience the terror of watching your village burn, feeling rough hands drag you toward a longship while everything you've ever known disappears in smoke and screams. Here's a fun fact. If you were captured by Vikings, you had about a 1 in 3 chance of dying before you even reach their homeland. So yeah, you probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. Now, let's drift back in time. The smell hits you first. Smoke mixed with blood and something else. Something animal and wrong. You're crouched behind the grain storage, watching flames lick at your neighbor's thatched roof, when a hand like an iron vice clamps around your arm. The Viking who finds you smells like sour ale and dried sweat, his beard matted with what might be yesterday's meal or someone else's blood. You try to scream, but another raider stuffs a wad of coarse fabric in your mouth. It tastes like salt and fear. They're surprisingly efficient, these Northmen. While you've heard tales of Viking berserkers working themselves into battle frenzies, what strikes you now is their business-like approach to destroying your world. One group herds the young and healthy toward the beach. Another systematically strips your village of anything valuable. And a third ensures nobody escapes. A historian named Michael McCormick once called Viking slave raids entrepreneurial ventures, which feels insultingly clinical when you're watching your uncle try to crawl away with an axe wound in his back. The mainstream historical record tells us Viking raids peaked between 793 and 1066 CE. But here's something they don't teach in school. Slaves, or thralls as the Vikings called them, made up as much as 25% of Scandinavian society. That's 1 in 4 people living in chains, though historians still argue whether this percentage includes only adult slaves or counts children born into bondage. You're about to become part of that statistic. Your hands are already being bound with rough rope that cuts into your wrists. The raider tying the knots looks barely older than you, maybe 17 summers, but his eyes are flat and dead as a shark's. He says something in his harsh language and laughs, showing teeth filed to points. Oh yeah, some Vikings did that. Filed their teeth for intimidation, though scholars debate whether it was widespread or just certain warrior cults who practiced dental modification. Around you, your village dies. The baker, who used to slip you extra honey cakes, lies face down in the mud, his apron still dusted with flour. Your best friend's sister gets dragged by her hair toward the ships, her wedding dress from last week now torn and muddy. The Vikings ignore the old and the sick. No profit there. Focusing instead on anyone who looks strong enough to survive what's coming. Here's a detail that might make you feel slightly better. In a cosmic joke sort of way, you're not special. Viking slavers hit Ireland, England, Scotland, France, and even ventured as far as Spain and North Africa. They were equal opportunity destroyers, though they did prefer certain targets. Monasteries were favorite stops, not just for the gold and silver, but because monks and nuns were literate and could fetch higher prices. Historians still argue whether Vikings specifically targeted religious sites for ideological reasons or purely economic ones. The raider shoves you forward, and you stumble toward the beach where 3 longships wait like predatory birds. Their carved dragon heads seem to watch your approach with wooden eyes. You've heard stories about these ships, how they can sail up rivers other vessels can't navigate, how they move like ghosts across the North Sea. What you haven't heard is how they smell when packed with human cargo. As you're pushed toward the lead ship, you catch a glimpse of your mother. She's fighting, clawing at a massive Viking who just laughs and backhands her into unconsciousness. You'll never know if she survived. That's part of the torture, the not knowing. The Vikings were masters of psychological warfare, though they probably didn't think of it in those terms. To them, you're not even human anymore. You're movable wealth, as one Old Norse legal text charmingly puts it. The ship's hold is a mouth that swallows you whole. You're shoved down a wooden ladder slick with seawater and vomit, tumbling into darkness that reeks of human misery. Your eyes adjust slowly to reveal a nightmare. Bodies packed so tight you can't tell where one person ends and another begins. The wooden ribs of the ship curve overhead, like you're trapped inside some massive beast's belly, which isn't far from the truth. They chain you to the person next to you with iron shackles that are somehow both rusty and sharp. Your neighbor is a boy maybe 12 years old who won't stop whimpering for his mother. On your other side, a woman mutters prayers in a language you don't recognize. Might be Frankish, might be something else. The Vikings' slave network stretched from Dublin to Constantinople, creating what one historian called the first global human trafficking system. Though historians still argue whether calling it global is anachronistic, since they didn't know about the Americas yet. The ship lurches as it pushes off from shore, and your stomach immediately rebels. There's nowhere to vomit except on yourself or your neighbors. And soon, the hold fills with the sounds and smells of 30 people discovering why Vikings preferred to sail with empty stomachs. Here's a fun historical tidbit. Viking ships were engineering marvels that could flex with the waves instead of fighting them, which is great for the crew up top, but means you down below get to experience every single swell and dip. Above your head, you hear the Vikings singing. They're probably performing a rowing chant, though it sounds more like wolves howling at the moon. The oars creak in rhythm, and you realize with growing horror that this sound will define your world for weeks. Creak splash, occasionally punctuated by someone screaming or the crack of a whip when the slavers get bored. Water seeps through the hull constantly, not enough to sink the ship, but enough to ensure you're always wet. The North Sea in autumn is nobody's friend, and hypothermia starts claiming victims by the second day. The old man chained 3 people down from you goes quiet during the night, and by morning he's just weight the living have to drag around until the Vikings notice. They'll toss him overboard without ceremony, maybe make a joke about feeding the fishes. Here's something archaeology tells us that written sources don't. Slave ships often carried significantly more women than men. Bone analysis from various Viking-age burial sites suggests female slaves outnumbered males by almost 2 to 1, probably because women were considered more versatile property. They could work farms, weave cloth, cook, clean, and, well, provide other services their owners demanded. You try not to think about what that means for the teenage girl, 2 rows over, who hasn't stopped crying since you left shore. The Vikings feed you twice a day if you're lucky, usually some kind of porridge that tastes like wet sand mixed with despair. They lower buckets on ropes, and you have maybe 30 seconds to grab what you can before they pull them back up. The water situation is worse. They give you just enough to keep you alive, but not enough to stay healthy. Your lips crack, your tongue swells, and somewhere around day 4 you start seeing things that aren't there. Bathroom breaks don't exist. You soil yourself where you sit, adding another layer to the symphony of smells. The Vikings occasionally throw buckets of seawater down to clean the hold, which mostly just means you get to be cold, wet, and filthy instead of just filthy. Some historians argue this was deliberate psychological breaking, making you live in your own waste to destroy your sense of self. Others think the Vikings were just practical and didn't care about slave comfort any more than a modern farmer worries about a cow's dignity. You learn to tell time by the quality of darkness. Dawn brings a slightly lighter shade of black through the cracks overhead. Noon means you might actually see the face of the person chained next to you. Night is absolute. A darkness so complete you start to forget what your own hands look like. The boy next to you stops whimpering after the first week. You're not sure if he's given up or died, and you're afraid to check. Sometimes the Vikings come down to select someone for something. Their faces appear in the hatch like demons, pointing at whoever catches their eye. Usually they pick women, sometimes pretty boys. They come back hours later if they come back at all. Nobody talks about what happens up there, but the hollow look in their eyes tells you everything. One woman comes back with her hair shorn off. Apparently some Viking wanted to make rope from it. Since human hair makes surprisingly strong cordage, the worst part isn't the physical suffering, though that's bad enough. It's the way time stretches like molten glass, each moment expanding into its own small eternity of misery. You start to forget your name, your village, whether you ever had a life before this wooden hell. That's exactly what they want, to break you down until you're empty enough to fill with whatever they decide you should be. By the time land appears on the horizon, you've been at sea for 3 weeks. A third of your fellow captives are dead, their bodies fed to whatever follows in the ship's wake. You're the lucky ones, if you can call it that. You survived the middle passage of the Viking Age, though what waits for you might make you wish you hadn't. The slave market at Hedeby assaults every sense you have left. After weeks in darkness, even the grey northern sun burns your eyes like acid. You stumble off the ship on legs that barely remember how to walk, prodded forward by spear butts while merchants and buyers crowd around like carrion birds. The stench here is different from the ship, still awful, but mixed with wood smoke, leather, and the sharp tang of silver changing hands. They strip you naked first, not gradually, not with any warning, just hands grabbing at your salt-stiffened clothes, tearing them away until you're exposed to the cold morning air and hundreds of appraising eyes. The Vikings waste nothing, so even your rags get bundled up to sell as ship caulking or fire starter. You try to cover yourself, but the slavers slap your hands away. Modesty is for people, and you're not people anymore. A man with a beard braided with silver rings grabs your jaw, forcing your mouth open to check your teeth like you're a horse at auction. His fingers taste like pickled fish and old copper. He grunts something to his companion, probably commenting on whether you look strong enough to survive winter fieldwork. Fun fact, dental examination was so standard in Viking slave markets that they developed a whole vocabulary around tooth quality. Tenor goda meant good teeth, which could add 20% to your price. The prodding gets worse. They check your muscles, your joints, looking for any weakness that might lower your value. A woman with scarred hands runs her fingers through your hair, checking for lice or disease. Someone else examines your feet. Can you still run? Are you worth the risk of escape? They even check between your legs, and you learn that shame has depths you never imagined. The 12-year-old boy from the ship cries silently as they do the same to him. Here's something historians still argue about: whether Viking slave markets were permanent installations or pop-up operations that followed trading seasons. Archaeological evidence from places like Hedeby and Birka shows designated areas for human trafficking, complete with holding pens and display platforms, You're standing on one of those platforms now, elevated so buyers can get a good look at the merchandise. The wood is worn smooth by thousands of bare feet, stained dark with substances you don't want to identify. The auctioneer starts his patter in Old Norse, occasionally switching to broken Arabic or Frankish when foreign buyers look interested. You catch maybe one word in 10, but the tone is universal. He's listing your good points like a farmer describing cattle: strong back, good teeth, young enough to train, old enough to work hard, no obvious diseases, probably fertile, if you're female. The crowd nods along, some making notes on wax tablets. Buyers come in all types. There's a weathered farmer looking for field hands, his clothes patched but clean. A severe-looking woman who might run a textile operation, judging by the blue dye staining her fingers. A fat merchant whose eyes linger too long on the younger slaves. And then there are the ones who make your blood freeze, the hard-faced men looking for sacrifices, though they'd never admit it openly. Norse custom demanded slaves accompany their masters to the afterlife, and somebody has to supply them. The bidding starts with hack silver, literally hacked pieces of silver jewelry that Vikings used as currency before coins became common. Each fragment gets weighed on small scales, and you watch your value measured out in broken arm rings and chunks of Byzantine plates. The mainstream historical record says a healthy adult slave cost about the same as 3 cows or 12 sheep. Here's the weird part. You might actually prefer being worth more, because expensive slaves got better treatment to protect the investment. A blacksmith type keeps raising his hand, competing with the textile woman. You find yourself silently rooting for her. At least weaving seems less likely to kill you than whatever a blacksmith needs slaves for. The bidding slows around what looks like 2 pounds of silver, which makes you middle-range inventory. Not valuable enough to pamper, not cheap enough to work to death without thought. The perfect price point for a lifetime of moderate misery. Between lots, they force-feed you some kind of gruel to make you look healthier. It's the first warm food you've had in weeks, but it sits like lead in your stomach. A girl near you vomits hers back up and gets beaten for making a mess. They clean her off and put her back on the block, lowering her price to damaged goods rates. Historians still argue whether slave markets had standard return policies or if all sales were final. The runic inscriptions that mention slave sales are frustratingly vague on details. The textile woman wins you with a final bid. She looks you over with professional disinterest, checking your hands for flexibility, your arms for strength. She says something to the auctioneer about delivery, and suddenly you realize this isn't over. You're not going with her today. First, you get branded. They drag you to a corner where a man tends a brazier full of glowing irons. The smell of charred flesh already hangs thick in the air. Some slaves get marked on the shoulder, others on the forehead if they're repeat escapees. The iron he selects for you is small, just a simple rune that marks you as property. You've heard that some masters use intricate designs, family symbols that make their slaves walking advertisements. The textile woman apparently prefers simplicity. The brand touches your shoulder for maybe 3 seconds, but time stops. The pain is so pure, so absolute, that your mind simply vacates your body for a moment. You smell your own flesh cooking and hear a sound like sizzling bacon. When you come back to yourself, you're on your knees in the dirt, and the brand man is already heating the iron for the next slave. Your new owner calls you Trollen, which apparently means the slave in her dialect. She doesn't ask your real name. Why would she? You're not Bjorn or Astrid or whatever your parents called you back when you were human. You're just another piece of equipment for her textile operation, somewhere between a loom and a particularly clever ox. The other slaves in her workshop have equally charming designations: Holtfoot, Scarface, the Saxon. Historians note that stripping slaves of their names was universal across Viking society, though they still argue whether this was deliberately dehumanizing or just practical inventory management. She puts an iron collar around your neck the first day. Not a fancy one, just a simple ring with her mark scratched into it, secured with a rivet that requires special tools to remove. The weight is negligible at first, maybe 2 pounds of cold metal. By the end of the first week, it feels like you're carrying a millstone. The collar serves 3 purposes. It marks you as property, makes running away harder. Try being inconspicuous with iron around your neck, and provides a convenient attachment point for chains when needed. Your owner runs a bood, a combination workshop and trading post, near the market district. The building smells of wool, old smoke, and the peculiar musty scent of plant dyes fermenting in vats. You're assigned to the worst job immediately, stomping wool in tubs of aged urine to clean and soften it. Yes, urine. The ammonia in week-old piss is apparently fantastic for processing wool, though nobody explains the chemistry to you. They just point at the tub and mime stomping until you get the message. The fascinating thing about Viking slavery, if anything about slavery can be called fascinating, is how codified it was. The Gragas and other law codes spelled out exactly what slaves could and couldn't do, what punishments were appropriate for which infractions, even what happened if a slave accidentally hurt a free person. You learn these rules through pain. Touch a free person without permission. That's a beating. Look at a free woman too long. That's a worse beating. Forget to call every single person Hera or Fru. Hope you enjoy missing meals. Your fellow slaves come from everywhere. There's a Frankish woman who was a merchant's daughter before raiders hit her convoy. 2 Irish monks who still pray in Latin when they think nobody's listening. A Spanish boy who speaks no language anyone recognizes and communicates entirely through exhausted gestures. The Vikings were equal opportunity enslavers, though they did show preferences. Irish slaves were considered good breeding stock. Slavs were prized for manual labor, hence the word slave, and Franks supposedly made better house servants. Here's something the sagas don't tell you. Slave humor is the darkest thing imaginable. You develop inside jokes about which overseer hits hardest, Sigurd, who aims for kidneys, which dying method sounds least awful, consensus, drowning, and whether Thor's hammer is compensating for something. It's not funny. Nothing here is funny. But laughing beats screaming, and you've got to do something with the rage that builds up like pus in a wound. The textile woman, you never learn her actual name, is what passes for a good owner. She only beats you for actual infractions, feeds you enough to keep you working, and hasn't raped anyone this month. The bar is so low it's underground, but you learn to be grateful for small mercies. She even lets you keep the tips of your fingers when you mess up a particularly expensive batch of dye, though she makes sure you watch while she takes them from the Irish monk who taught you wrong. Your sleeping quarters are a lean-to attached to the main building, shared with 12 other slaves. You get straw that's changed maybe 4 times a year, one thin blanket that might have been wool sometime in the previous century, and whatever body heat you can steal from your neighbors. Privacy doesn't exist. You learn to ignore the sounds of 12 people trying to maintain some scrap of humanity in the dark. Someone's always crying. Someone's always coughing. Someone's always mumbling in their sleep about homes they'll never see again. The collar starts leaving sores after a few weeks. The iron rusts in the constant damp. and that rust grinds into your skin with every movement. You try padding it with scraps of cloth, but the overseer notices and takes them away. Apparently, suffering is part of your job description. A slave 2 workshops over develops an infection from his collar and dies of blood poisoning. His owner complains about the financial loss for days. Winter changes everything. Your clothes are whatever cast-offs the free people don't want. Usually so threadbare they're more suggestion than fabric. The workshop has a fire, but slaves work farthest from it. Your fingers go numb handling wet wool, and you learn the specific pain of warming frozen hands too quickly. Feels like someone's driving needles under your nails. The Frankish woman loses 3 toes to frostbite. She keeps working. Here's the thing historians still argue about. How much did Viking-age Scandinavians actually depend on slave labor? Some say the entire economy would have collapsed without thralls. Others argue slavery was more of a luxury for the wealthy, standing knee-deep in piss-soaked wool, working 16-hour days just to keep the textile trade flowing. You're pretty sure you know the answer. This whole civilization is built on broken backs and stolen lives. Your owner starts calling you useful after you figure out a better way to card wool. It's not a compliment. It's a threat. Useful slaves work harder. Useful slaves get noticed. Useful slaves sometimes get to accompany their masters on trading journeys, which sounds like an opportunity until you remember what happened to that merchant slave last winter. They found him frozen to a tree 3 days' ride from town, left there because he moved too slowly in the snow. Dawn comes like a whip crack across your shoulders, literally, since that's how the overseer prefers to wake the slave quarters. You're on your feet before your eyes fully open, muscle memory overriding the screaming protests of a body that never gets enough rest. The workday starts when the roosters crow and doesn't end until the free people decide they're tired, which means you'll be lucky to collapse back onto your straw by midnight. Your breakfast, if you can call it that, is yesterday's porridge with a generous helping of weevils for extra protein. The first month, you tried picking them out. Now you're grateful for the texture. At least it proves something was once alive in this grey sludge. You get 3 minutes to eat, standing up because sitting is for people who matter, before trudging out to whatever fresh hell today's labour brings. Spring means planting season, and the textile woman owns farmland outside the settlement. Guess who gets to work it? You and 5 other slaves trudge behind an ox-drawn plough that's seen better decades, breaking up soil that's more rock than earth. The overseer rides alongside on horseback, occasionally motivating you with his special encouragement stick. Fun historical fact: Viking-age ploughs were actually technological marvels that could turn heavy clay soils. But that just means you're pushing more weight with every step. The blisters form before noon. They'll pop by evening, leaving raw flesh that screams every time you grip the plough handles. By the end of the week, your hands are more scar tissue than skin. But that's the point. Can't run away if you can't hold anything. The Irish monks work beside you, still muttering prayers between gasps. You wonder if their God is listening. Probably not, since he let them end up here. Here's what the sagas don't mention about Viking agriculture. It's boring, mind-numbingly, soul-crushingly boring. You plant the same barley, tend the same turnips, spread the same manure, day after day after day. Your world shrinks to the patch of dirt in front of you and the next rock that needs moving. Sometimes you catch yourself missing the variety of the textile workshop, then hate yourself for developing Stockholm syndrome about stomping piss wool. The female slaves have it worse, though comparing miseries is like arguing whether drowning or burning is preferable. They work the fields too, but also have to service the household at night, cooking, cleaning, and whatever else the free folk demand. The young Frankish woman comes back with bruises in new places every morning. Nobody asks, nobody wants to know. Historians still argue whether sexual violence against slaves was systematic or opportunistic in Viking society. From where you're standing, the distinction seems academic. Lunch is bread so hard you could build houses with it, sometimes softened with water that tastes like it's been filtered through a burial ground. You get 10 minutes to eat and empty your bladder. Not nearly enough time for either, which is intentional. The overseer likes to play a game where he counts down your break time extra fast, then beats whoever's still squatting in the bushes when he reaches 0. He thinks it's hilarious. You're developing kidney problems from holding it too long. The afternoon brings manure duty, human waste, animal waste, rotting vegetation, anything that might convince crops to grow in this unforgiving soil. You load it, spread it, work it into the earth with your bare hands because tools are for free people. The smell gets into your skin, your hair, your dreams. Other slaves start avoiding you in the quarters because you reek like death's outhouse. Not that anyone smells like roses here, but there's a hierarchy even in stench. Your back gives out first. It starts as a twinge, then a constant ache, then shooting pains that make you bite through your lip to keep from crying out. Showing weakness is dangerous. Injured slaves who can't work don't eat, and slaves who don't eat don't last long. You learn to move in ways that hide the pain. Develop a slouch that takes pressure off the worst spots. 20 years old, and you move like an arthritic grandfather. The overseer notices anyway. He's been doing this long enough to spot a slave favoring their left side from across a field. But instead of beating you, he does something worse. He smiles. Turns out the textile woman needs someone for a special project tomorrow, and you've just volunteered. The other slaves look at you with pity. Special projects never end well. As the sun sets, you're still working. The free people are having some kind of feast, which means extra labor for everyone. You haul water, gather firewood, slaughter chickens with your ruined hands. The smell of roasting meat drives you half mad with hunger, but you'll be lucky to get the bones after the dogs are done. There's an old saying among thralls: we plant what we'll never harvest, cook what we'll never taste, build what we'll never own. Historians debate whether this saying is period accurate or later romanticism. You're too tired to care about historical authenticity. By the time you stumble back to the quarters, your legs barely work. You've been awake for 18 hours, eaten maybe 600 calories of gruel and rock bread, and burned through thousands of calories of labor. The math doesn't work long term, which is why most field slaves don't see 40. You collapse onto your straw and try not to think about tomorrow's special project. The Frankish woman is crying again, silently so the overseer won't hear. Someone's coughing sounds wet and tubercular. The Spanish boy rocks back and forth, humming something that might have been a lullaby in another life. You close your eyes and dream of dirt. Always dirt. Mountains of it that you'll never finish moving. Even in sleep, you can't escape the fields. The barn is your bedroom, dining room, and torture chamber rolled into one festering package. You share this luxury accommodation with 3 pigs, a dozen chickens, a milk cow with an attitude problem, and whatever rats consider the place home. The animals actually get better treatment than you. They're valuable property that produces eggs, milk, and meat. You're just the equipment that keeps them alive. Your bed is a pile of straw in the corner furthest from the door, which means furthest from any hope of fresh air, but closest to the cow's business end. The first night. You tried to build a barrier between yourself and the livestock. The overseer knocked it down and explained with his fists that separating yourself from animals was putting on airs above your station. Message received. The pigs become your unwitting bedmates. They're actually warmer than your threadbare blanket, even if they do smell like, well, pigs. On the coldest nights, you curl up against their bristly sides and pretend their grunting is conversation. You've named them stupid, stupider, and the one who bites, which is probably a sign your mind is going. The overseer catches you talking to them once and laughs so hard he forgets to beat you. Apparently, slaves befriending barnyard animals is peak entertainment. Here's a detail archaeologists love to argue about. Evidence suggests some Viking-age barns had designated slave quarters with slightly better conditions than the animal stalls. Your barn has no such luxury. You sleep on the same straw the animals piss in, breathe the same air thick with ammonia and methane, eat your meals while chickens literally peck at your feet trying to steal crumbs. One historian called it practical integration of human and animal resources. You call it Tuesday. The straw hasn't been changed since autumn, and it's now late spring. It's evolved its own ecosystem, fleas, lice, things that crawl and bite in the dark. You've given up trying to get them all. It's like trying to bail out the ocean with a thimble. Instead, you've developed a complicated relationship with your parasites. They're awful, but they're consistent. In a life where everything else is uncertain, you can always count on waking up with new flea bites. Your morning routine involves checking which animals died in the night. Dead chickens mean less eggs, which means the overseer takes it out of your hide. Dead pigs mean a massive disposal problem and definitely a beating. The cow hasn't died yet, but she's getting old and mean, and you live in terror of finding her cold one morning. You've started praying to whatever gods might listen to keep her alive just one more day. The Christian monks find this hilarious, you praying for a cow while they pray for salvation. The barn leaks, not dramatically, not enough to warrant repairs, but just enough to ensure you're never completely dry. Rain finds its way through gaps in the roof with supernatural accuracy, always landing on your straw, your food, your face when you're trying to sleep. You've mapped every leak mentally, shifting your sleeping position based on weather patterns like some kind of miserable meteorologist. Winter in the barn is its own special hell. The animal body heat helps, but not enough. Your breath freezes in the air. Ice forms on the inside walls, and your blanket becomes a rigid sheet that provides all the warmth of a funeral shroud. 2 slaves froze to death in this barn last winter. You know, because you helped drag their bodies out. The overseer complained about the inconvenience for a week. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about sleeping with animals. You start to understand them. The pig's different grunts for hunger, contentment, and fear. The chicken hierarchy and its vicious politics. The cow's moods and what they mean for your safety. Ears back means duck. You're becoming less human and more livestock yourself, which is probably the point. Historians still argue whether this dehumanization was intentional or just convenient. From inside the barn, covered in straw and shit and flea bites, the distinction seems moot. Your owner visits the barn maybe once a month to check her investment. Not you, the animals. She counts chickens, examines the pigs for signs of disease, checks the cow's udder for milk production. You might as well be invisible, just another farm implement leaning against the wall. Once, she steps on your hand without noticing. You don't make a sound. Making sounds leads to notice, and notice leads to pain. The worst part about barn living isn't the smell, though that's bad, or the parasites, though they're awful, or even the cold, though it might kill you. It's the way you start to forget you were ever anything else. Your dreams smell like pig shit. Your thoughts move at cow speed. You catch yourself grunting instead of speaking sometimes. And the overseer finds this so amusing he makes you grunt for visiting traders like you're performing a trick. The Spanish boy shares the barn too, along with an old Slavic woman who might have been pretty once, before decades of this life carved away everything soft. She's taught you which rats are safe to eat, the young ones, and which will make you sick, anything near the grain stores. She shows you how to milk the cow without getting kicked, how to steal eggs without the rooster noticing, how to stay just alive enough to keep working, but not healthy enough to be interesting. Some nights, when the wind howls through the gaps in the walls and the animals are restless, you lie awake wondering if this is it, if you'll die here in this barn, just another frozen corpse to be dragged out come spring. The Slavic woman must read your thoughts because she always says the same thing. Not tonight. Tonight we're still breathing. It's not comfort, exactly, but it's something. A promise that even here, even now, even covered in straw and shit and hopelessness, you're still technically alive. Your meals, if you can call them that, are a masterclass in culinary cruelty. Breakfast is that grey porridge mentioned earlier, barley boiled until it surrenders all taste and texture, served cold because heating it would waste firewood on slaves. Lunch is usually bread made from the sweepings of the mill floor, generously seasoned with dirt, chaff, and the occasional small stone that chips your already damaged teeth. Dinner? That's when things get creative. The textile woman's household throws their scraps into a bucket throughout the day. Fish heads with the eyes already pecked out. Vegetable peelings that even the pigs rejected. Bones with microscopic traces of meat if you gnaw hard enough. This slop gets distributed among the slaves each evening, and you learn quickly that hesitation means starvation. You develop techniques, sucking marrow from bones until they're white, chewing fish scales for any hint of nutrition, eating apple cores down to nothing but seeds. Here's a fun Viking fact. Their free people ate quite well, with varied diets including fresh meat, dairy, vegetables, and imported delicacies. Archaeological evidence from trash heaps shows they enjoyed everything from whale meat to imported wine. You know this because you're occasionally forced to serve at their feasts, watching them gorge on roasted lamb while your stomach tries to digest its own lining. The smell of their food is torture. You've learned to breathe through your mouth during feast duty. Sometimes you supplement your diet with creativity and desperation. Those rats the Slavic woman taught you about. They taste like stringy chicken if you don't think too hard about it. Grass and dandelions can fill your belly even if they provide no real nutrition. You've seen slaves eat bark, leather, candle wax, anything to quiet the constant gnawing hunger. One desperate winter, the Irish monks admitted to eating pages from their hidden prayer book. Vellum is technically protein, after all. The mouldy bread deserves special mention. It's not accidentally mouldy. It's deliberately given to slaves after free people reject it. The green-black fuzz growing on it might be penicillin, or might be toxic. You eat it anyway. You've developed a rating system for mold. White and blue, probably fine. Black? Scrape it off if you can. Red? That's how the Frankish woman died last month, convulsing and frothing. But when you haven't eaten in 2 days, even red mold starts looking appetizing. Water is another adventure. Slaves drink from the animal trough, downstream from where the livestock stand. The water tastes like a barn floor smells, with notes of manure and bog iron. In summer, it breeds mosquito larvae that you pretend are extra protein. In winter, you have to break through ice with your bare hands, leaving your fingers too numb to hold the bread you're trying to eat. Historians note that waterborne diseases killed more slaves than violence. And drinking from that trough, you absolutely believe it. The overseer has a special punishment involving food. Mess up badly enough, and he makes you watch while he feeds your dinner to the dogs. The dogs eat better than you anyway. They're valuable hunting animals. But watching them wolf down your bread while your stomach cramps with hunger is its own form of torture. Once, driven mad by 3 days without food, you tried to take a bone from one of the dogs. The bite marks took weeks to heal, and the overseer laughed so hard he gave you an extra beating for entertainment value. Here's something historians still argue about: whether Viking-age Scandinavians deliberately used starvation as a control mechanism, or if it was just economic efficiency. The law codes specify minimum food requirements for slaves, but those minimums assume you're a mathematical construct, not a person doing brutal physical labor. 1 pound of bread and some porridge per day might keep you technically alive, but it won't keep you healthy or sane. Feast days are the worst. The free people celebrate harvests, raids, weddings, and religious festivals with tables groaning under the weight of food. You serve course after course: roasted meats, fresh bread, honey cakes, imported fruits, mead, and ale flowing like rivers. Your job is to stay invisible while ensuring their cups never empty and their plates never sit bare. The smell makes you dizzy. Sometimes young free children amuse themselves by throwing food at slaves to watch you scramble for it. You hate yourself for diving after a half-eaten piece of chicken, but pride tastes worse than humiliation. The Spanish boy develops a talent for stealing food. Not obviously, that would mean losing a hand, but little bits here and there. A handful of grain from a torn sack, eggs from nests the overseers don't know about, even scraps from the dogs when they're sleeping. He shares sometimes, wordlessly passing you a stolen turnip or a palm full of oats. It's dangerous kindness. Getting caught means punishment for everyone, but solidarity is the only thing keeping any of you remotely human. Malnutrition manifests in interesting ways. Your hair falls out in clumps, your nails crack and peel, cuts take forever to heal, and when they do, they leave dark scars. Your night vision goes first, probably scurvy, then your teeth start loosening. The old Slavic woman lost most of hers years ago and gums her food like a toothless baby. That's your future if you live long enough, which statistically you won't. Sometimes, in your hungrier moments, you dream about food from your old life, your mother's stew with actual chunks of meat, fresh bread with butter, berries picked from the forest, sweet and tart on your tongue. These dreams are worse than nightmares because you wake up to watery porridge and mouldy bread, and the contrast breaks something inside you that might have been hope. The overseer's fist connects with your ribs for the 3rd time today, and you've learned not to tense up. It only makes the pain worse. This beating is for looking at him wrong, which could mean anything from actual eye contact, forbidden, to simply existing in his line of sight when he's in a mood. You've become an expert at reading his emotional weather. Jaw clenched means find somewhere else to be. Whistling means someone's about to bleed. And silence means run if you can. His name is Magnus, though you'd never dare use it. He's not particularly large by Viking standards, but he makes up for it with creative sadism. His favorite tool is a switch made from birch, thin enough to whistle through the air, flexible enough to wrap around limbs, leaving welts that bloom purple-black like poisonous flowers. He names his switches like pets. The current one is Tooth Seeker, because he once caught a slave's face with it, sending 2 molars flying. Here's the thing about casual violence in Viking slave culture. It wasn't considered violence at all. The law codes treat beating slaves like maintaining farm equipment. You can find runic inscriptions that casually mention thrall punishment between notes about the weather and grain prices. Historians still argue whether this indicates widespread brutality or just matter-of-fact acceptance. From your position on the ground, tasting blood and dirt, the academic distinction seems irrelevant. Magnus has refined beating slaves into an art form. He knows exactly where to hit for maximum pain with minimum damage to productivity. Kidneys make you piss blood, but you can still work. Soles of the feet mean agony with every step, but no visible injury. The sweet spot between shoulder blades that makes breathing torture, but doesn't break ribs. He's teaching his son the trade, letting the boy practice on older slaves who can't work as hard anyway. The kid's 12 and already shows promise. The worst beatings aren't for infractions, they're for entertainment. Winter nights are long, mead is strong, and free people get bored. Sometimes they make slaves fight each other for scraps of food. Sometimes they invent impossible tasks just to watch you fail and suffer the consequences. Once, Magnus made the Spanish boy count grains of barley for hours, beating him every time he lost count, which was inevitable because the numbers got higher than his Norse vocabulary. Pure sadism dressed up as discipline. You learn to gauge beatings like weather. A quick cuff to the head means move faster. The switch means you've genuinely angered someone. Closed fists mean brace for real damage. The worst is when they heat iron tools. Not enough to brand, just enough to blister. That's revenge beating. The kind that happens when a slave costs them money or embarrassment. The Slavic woman has scars from hot iron all down her back from the time she accidentally spoiled a batch of expensive dye. Here's a detail that shows up in saga literature, but historians debate. The concept of nid, or unmanliness, could protect male slaves from certain types of abuse. Beating a slave too severely might make the owner look weak, like he couldn't control property without excessive force. This social pressure meant beatings had to appear justified and proportional. Of course, proportional is a flexible concept when you're dealing with people who think making slaves fight to exhaustion is acceptable after dinner entertainment. The psychological torture is almost worse than the physical. Magnus likes to make you choose your own punishment. 10 lashes or 2 days without food. Beating now or watch another slave take it for you. These choices are designed to break down solidarity, make you complicit in your own suffering. The Christian monks struggle most with this. Their faith tells them to protect others, but survival instinct makes them choose self-preservation. You've watched grown men sob not from pain, but from the shame of letting someone else suffer in their place. Female slaves face additional horrors. Magnus doesn't rape them. That's the owner's privilege. But he finds other ways to assert dominance. Making them work naked in winter, cutting their hair to sell. Using them as practice for his son to inspect merchandise, while they stand there dead-eyed and silent. The Frankish woman tried to fight back once. Magnus didn't beat her. He beat the Spanish boy instead, making her watch, explaining that her defiance caused his pain. She never fought again. Recovery from beatings is your own problem. No healing time, no reduced work, definitely no medical care. You learn folk remedies from other slaves, moss for open wounds, chewed willow bark for pain, urine for cleaning cuts, It's sterile, and you have nothing else. The barn becomes an informal hospital where slaves tend each other with stolen moments and contraband herbs. Everyone has scars. Everyone knows which bones didn't set right. Everyone carries the map of their suffering written on their skin. The anticipation is sometimes worse than the beating itself. Magnus likes to announce morning punishments, but wait until evening to deliver them, ensuring you spend all day dreading what's coming. Your body stays tensed, adrenaline burning through energy you can't spare, stomach churning with fear that makes it impossible to choke down your meager food. By the time the beating comes, you're already exhausted from terror. But here's what Magnus doesn't understand. Every beating makes you harder, not stronger, because your body is breaking down faster than it can repair, but harder, like scar tissue, like stone. You learn to go somewhere else in your mind when the switch falls. You build walls around the parts of yourself that can still feel. You watch your own beating like it's happening to someone else, someone who used to be you before all this started. Some slaves break entirely, become empty shells that move and work but never really see anymore. Others break bad, go berserk and attack knowing it means death. You're balanced on that knife's edge, one beating away from either option. The Slavic woman sees it in your eyes and whispers at night, "Not yet, not today, save it." Save what? The rage? The fragment of humanity? The strength to eventually die on your own terms? You're not sure, but you hold on anyway. The Frankish woman's scream stopped an hour ago, which is somehow worse than when they started. She's in the main house now, returned to the slave quarters with that hollow look that says everything without words. Her dress is torn, blood on her thighs, and nobody meets her eyes because what is there to say? This is Tuesday or Thursday. The days blur together when marked only by variations in suffering. Female slaves exist in a special category of hell. Yes, they work the fields and workshops like everyone else, but they also serve as unwilling bedwarmers, forced companions, and outlets for whatever twisted desires their owners harbor. The law codes actually address this, not to protect the women, but to establish compensation rates if someone damages another person's property. Rape your own slave? That's fine. Rape someone else's? You owe them money for decreased value. The textile woman keeps 3 young female slaves specifically for her male relatives and important guests. It's considered good hospitality to offer your slaves for visitors' comfort, like providing fresh linens or hearty meals. These girls, because they're always girls, taken young and broken early, live in a slightly better section of the house. They get marginally better food to keep them pretty, cleaner clothes to make them appealing, and their own special kind of torment that makes fieldwork look like mercy. You learn to recognize the signs, the way they flinch at footsteps, how they've perfected the art of being invisible until summoned, the peculiar blankness they wear like armor, present in body, but absent in every way that matters. One of them, barely 14, has developed a nervous tic, where she pulls out her own hair strand by strand. Another rocks constantly, a tiny motion that never quite stops. The third doesn't speak anymore, not won't, but can't, like something inside her throat just gave up. Here's a historical detail that makes bile rise in your throat. Viking Age society considered slave children the property of the mother's owner, regardless of who fathered them. This created a sick incentive system where owners would force their female slaves to bear children, essentially breeding more property. The Frankish woman is pregnant now, her 3rd time since capture. The first baby died at birth. The second was sold to a passing trader when it was barely walking. This one will probably meet the same fate. The overseer Magnus particularly enjoys what he calls teaching moments with female slaves. Nothing that would damage the merchandise permanently. He's too practical for that, but enough to remind them of their place. He makes them stand naked in the snow while he critiques their bodies like livestock. He forces them to practice hospitality on each other while the free men watch and laugh. He invents humiliating tasks that serve no purpose except degradation. You've seen him make a woman bark like a dog for hours because she looked too proud. Male slaves don't escape sexual violence either, though historians still argue about how common it was. The young Spanish boy attracts the wrong kind of attention from a trader who visits monthly. We all know what happens in the storage shed, though the boy never speaks of it. He just comes back quieter each time, moving like something inside is broken. The Christian monks pray for him. The rest of us sharpen small stones and hide them in our straw, knowing they're useless but needing the illusion of some defense. Pregnancy among slaves is its own nightmare. No rest, no reduced workload, certainly no medical care. Women work until they literally collapse in labor, give birth in the barn or the fields, then get back to work as soon as they can stand. The infant mortality rate is astronomical. Maybe 1 in 3 survives the first year. Those who do survive face a future of slavery from their first breath. The textile woman views pregnant slaves as an investment opportunity, calculating whether the potential new slave is worth the temporary decrease in the mother's productivity. The psychological torture of forced breeding might be worse than the physical violation. Watching your child sold like a calf, knowing you'll never see them again, powerless to protect them from the same fate you're suffering. It breaks something fundamental in the human spirit. The Frankish woman had a name for her second child. She whispered it sometimes in her sleep. After they took him, she stopped sleeping altogether, just stared at the ceiling through the dark hours. Some female slaves find ways to resist. They chew certain herbs to prevent pregnancy or cause miscarriages. They accidentally injure themselves in ways that make them less appealing. One woman scarred her own face with a heated nail to avoid being chosen for house service. The punishment for such defiance is severe. You're damaging property, after all. But desperation makes its own logic. Better to suffer on your own terms than be destroyed on theirs. The worst part is how normalized it all becomes. A girl disappears into the main house, returns broken, and work continues. Someone's pregnancy starts to show, and everyone calculates how long before the baby is sold. Young slaves learn to make themselves ugly. Old slaves teach them which herbs to chew. And it's all just part of the landscape of horror you inhabit. Even writing about it feels like betrayal, reducing their suffering to words when words can't capture the weight of it. The Frankish woman gives birth in the barn on a cold autumn night. The baby is small but alive, a girl with her mother's eyes. For 3 days, the Frankish woman almost smiles, holding this tiny life like it might mean something. Then the textile woman decides the baby is healthy enough to sell. The screaming when they take the child is primal, animal, the sound of something breaking that can never be repaired. By morning, the Frankish woman is silent again. By winter, she's gone, whether escaped, sold, or dead. Nobody knows or dares to ask. The Spanish boy's child arrives on a spring morning, born in the same filthy straw where you sleep. You didn't even know he could get pregnant. Turns out he was born female, just young enough when captured that nobody cared to check properly. The Vikings called such people ergi, though using that word about a free person would start a blood feud. For a slave, it just means you're available for whatever use your owners demand. This baby is different from the Frankish woman's. This one comes out wrong, too early, too small, struggling to breathe in the barn's fetid air. The mother, you still think of him as the Spanish boy, because that's how he lived among you, tries desperately to warm the infant against his chest. But everyone can see it's hopeless. Even the pigs seem to sense death approaching, grunting nervously in their pen. Children born into slavery enter the world pre-damned. No naming ceremonies, no recognition as human, just another piece of potential property if they survive long enough. The textile woman keeps a tally in her ledger: births, deaths, projected value if they reach working age. It's right there next to the breeding records for her pigs. Historians note that Viking-age legal texts treat slave children as automatic property, inheriting their mother's status regardless of the father's freedom. The law is very clear. Slaves beget slaves. World without end. You've watched dozens of these births now. Women squatting in barns or fields, biting through leather to keep from screaming because too much noise brings Magnus with his switch. No midwives for slaves. You help each other or you don't. Learning through deadly trial and error which herbs slow bleeding, how to turn a breech baby, when to cut the cord. The Slavic woman has delivered so many she could be a proper midwife, if slaves were allowed to be anything. The babies who survive face a special kind of cruelty. They're often taken from their mothers early, sometimes sold, sometimes just moved to break emotional bonds that might interfere with productivity. You've seen toddlers worked as soon as they can walk, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, learning their place at the bottom of everything. By 5, they're in the fields. By 10, they're full workers. By 15, if they last that long, they're breeding stock themselves. But sometimes, and this is what breaks your heart, sometimes the mothers try to save their children through mercy, a hand over the mouth and nose until the struggling stops. Died in the night, they say, and even Magnus doesn't question it too hard. Infant mortality is expected among slaves. The Frankish woman told you once, before her second child was sold, that she'd considered it. Better dead than this, she whispered. You didn't argue. How could you? The Spanish boy's baby dies on its 3rd day, never strong enough to properly nurse. He holds the tiny corpse for hours until Magnus comes to collect it. Dead slaves, even infant ones, require proper disposal to avoid disease. They don't bury slave children in consecrated ground. They go in the midden heap with the rest of the waste, or sometimes get tossed in the bog if nobody wants to dig. The Spanish boy watches them take his child away, and something in his eyes just goes out. Free children, of course, live in a different universe. You see them sometimes, playing with wooden swords, learning their runes, dressed in warm clothes that actually fit. They're taught to see you as furniture that moves, and they learn the lesson well. The overseer's son already knows how to strike a slave without leaving marks that decrease value. The textile woman's daughter practices giving orders on the female slaves, imperious commands in her piping child voice that carry the weight of potential violence. Here's what the archaeological record doesn't show: the tiny graves that aren't graves, the small bones mixed with animal remains in trash heaps, the absence where children should have been. Historians can track the births through property records, but the deaths often go unrecorded, just wastage, like grain lost to rot or tools broken through use. Your owner loses more sleep over a sick pig than a dead slave baby. The mothers develop a terrible pragmatism. They don't name the babies for the first year. Why get attached to something that probably won't survive? They nurse them when they can, but don't fight when the overseer decides field work is more important than feeding schedules. They teach toddlers to be quiet, to be invisible, to never ever draw attention. It's horrible to watch a 2-year-old learn to cower properly, but it might keep them alive. Some women stop conceiving altogether, their bodies shutting down reproduction as a survival mechanism. Others bear child after child, worn out by 30, old by 35, dead by 40, if they're unlucky enough to last that long. The textile woman values fertile slaves higher. They produce more property. So women who stop bearing children often face increased violence to encourage their wombs back to productivity. The Spanish boy never speaks of his dead child. He returns to work silent as always. But now there's something broken in the way he moves. A month later, you find him hanging in the barn, his slight body swaying from the same beam where they string up slaughtered pigs. Magnus is furious. That's valuable property destroyed, and makes everyone work double shifts to make up for the loss. You help cut him down and notice his hands, small and delicate. He couldn't have been more than 16. That night in the quarters, nobody talks about it. What is there to say? Another slave dead, another child lost, another day in the endless grind of suffering. The Slavic woman hums something that might be a lullaby, might be a dirge. You lie in your straw and think about children you'll never have. Thank whatever gods might exist for that small mercy. Better to end with you than pass this curse to another generation. Better dust than slaves. Better nothing than this. Death, when it finally comes for slaves, offers no dignity. The old Slavic woman goes first. Collapsed in the textile workshop with her hands still tangled in wool she was carding. Her body stays there for hours, while the overseer debates whether it's worth stopping production to remove her. Finally, they drag her out by the ankles, her head bouncing on the threshold, and that's the last you see of the woman who taught you how to survive 6 winters in hell. No funeral rites for property, no washing of the body, no grave goods, no prayers to ease the journey to whatever afterlife awaits. Slaves get tossed in bog pits or left in the woods for scavengers. The Christians among you whisper about souls denied heaven without proper burial. But honestly, after living like this, how much worse could any hell be? The Vikings believe we'll continue serving in the afterlife. Thralls in death as in life. And that thought makes you want to scream until your throat tears. Here's what makes historians uncomfortable. The archaeological evidence of slave burials, when they're found at all, often shows signs of violence. Not just the violence of hard living, arthritis, healed breaks, worn joints, but perimortem trauma, crushed skulls, cut throats, evidence of being buried alive. Some argue these were sacrificial killings to accompany dead masters. Others suggest slaves too sick to work were simply disposed of. Either way, the message is clear. Your death, like your life, belongs to someone else. The textile woman's brother dies in autumn, and that's when you learn about grave slaves firsthand. They select 6 thralls to accompany him. 3 men, 3 women, all healthy enough to serve in the afterlife, but not so valuable that their loss hurts business. You're not chosen, which should feel like relief, but somehow makes you feel worthless. Not even good enough to murder, apparently. The chosen ones know what's coming. Everyone knows. They have 3 days to prepare, which means 3 days of watching them try to make peace with ending. The sacrifice happens at the funeral. They get the slaves drunk first, small mercy. on mead so strong it makes them stumble. One by one, they're led to the grave. The men go first, throats opened with the same casual efficiency used for slaughtering livestock. The women follow, but one breaks free and runs. She makes it maybe 30 feet before the overseer's spear finds her back. They drag her back and finish the job, cursing the delay. Her blood mixes with the others in the grave shaft, ensuring the dead man has servants forever. But most slave deaths are quieter. Exhaustion claims more than violence. You've seen people simply stop, working one moment, crumpled the next, hearts giving out from the strain of too much work on too little food. Disease spreads through slave quarters like wildfire. One coughing slave becomes 6, becomes 20, and the only treatment is to keep working until you either recover or don't. The barn becomes a morgue every winter, bodies stacking up until the ground thaws enough for disposal. Suicide is common enough that owners take precautions. No rope left where slaves can reach it. Tools counted and locked away. Even eating implements, what few you have, get monitored. But desperation breeds creativity. The Frankish woman found her exit in the river, walking into the current one spring morning and letting it carry her away. They found her body downstream, finally peaceful. Magnus beat everyone for not stopping her, as if we could watch each other every moment while still doing his work. Here's a detail from the sagas that haunts you. Sometimes slaves are buried with their collars still on, marking them as property even in death. Archaeologists find these collars in bogs and graves, often the only indicator that the bones belong to a thrall. The thought of wearing this iron forever, even after your body rots, makes you claw at your collar until your neck bleeds. Death should at least free you from that, but apparently not. The Christians try to maintain some dignity around death. They whisper last rites when someone's dying, trace crosses on foreheads with spit when there's no holy water. The monks have a running debate about whether a slave can perform sacraments, whether God recognizes the prayers of property. It would be funny if it weren't so desperate, arguing theology while someone bleeds out in dirty straw, trying to offer heaven to people who've already lived through hell. You develop a relationship with death, seeing it everywhere, in the wheezing breath of a slave who's worked too many winters, in the glassy eyes of a woman who's borne too many children, in the infected wounds that turn black and smell like meat gone bad. Death stops being scary and starts being an option, a door, the only choice you might ever get to make for yourself. Some slaves try to bargain with the gods for a better death. They leave tiny offerings, a saved grain of barley, a pretty stone, a strand of their own hair, hoping for mercy when the end comes. Others court death actively, taking the dangerous jobs, pushing their bodies past all limits. The young ones talk about dying in ways that would make them remembered, though you know better. Slaves aren't remembered. We're erased, replaced, forgotten before our bodies cool. Winter brings its own death lottery. Who freezes in their sleep? Who catches the coughing sickness? Who slips on ice and cracks their skull? You wake each morning surprised to be breathing. Check your barnmates to see who didn't make it through the night. The bodies freeze solid, making them easier to stack until spring burial. You've helped carry so many corpses you could do it in your sleep. Grab the arms, someone else takes the legs. Try not to think about how light humans become when all hope has left them. The worst part? You start envying the dead. They're free in the only way slaves can be free. No more beatings, no more hunger, no more watching the sun rise on another day exactly like the last. When you catch yourself thinking this way, you remember the Slavic woman's words, Not today. But the words sound hollower each time, and you wonder how many more times you can say them before they stop working entirely. The scar on Ragnar's foot tells you everything about the price of running. 3 toes gone, cut off neat as you please after his first escape attempt 2 summers ago. He still tries to hide the limp, but you all see it. The message is clear: run, and they'll take pieces of you until there's nothing left to run with. Yet people still try, because what else is there? Hope dies hard, even here. Your first real escape plan comes together slowly, whispered in the barn between checking for eavesdroppers. You and 2 others, the remaining Irish monk and a Saxon woman taken in the same raid that got you. The plan is simple because complex plans need resources you don't have. Wait for the new moon. Steal food over weeks. Tiny amounts that won't be missed. Head for the coast. Find a trading ship willing to take escaped slaves. It's stupid. It's doomed. You're going to try anyway. Here's what the sagas don't tell you about escaped slaves. Most don't make it past the first night. Vikings have dogs trained specifically to track thralls, and they know the land like you never will. The punishments for helping escaped slaves are severe enough that nobody risks it. Even other slaves might turn you in for an extra crust of bread or a day without beatings. The textile woman offers rewards for information about escape plans. Trust is a luxury you can't afford. Magnus demonstrates the latest refinement in runaway prevention on a Slavic man who made it 3 days before the dogs found him. First, hamstringing, cutting the tendons behind the knee so he'll never run again. Then branding on the forehead, a special rune that marks him as a flight risk. Finally, an iron collar with bells, so he can't move without announcing himself. The man survives it all, crawling now instead of walking, bells chiming his shame with every movement. Message received. You've seen every possible punishment for escape attempts. Ears cut off, eyes burned out with hot irons, tongues removed so they can't tell others about routes or methods. One woman who almost made it to a ship had her feet flayed, skin peeled off the soles like removing a boot. She lived, somehow, hobbling on bandaged stumps that never properly healed. The overseer makes her stand by the gate as a warning, her mangled feet visible to anyone thinking about running. But here's the thing. Sometimes people do escape. You hear whispers about slaves who made it to Iceland, where they could claim land if they survived long enough. Others supposedly reached the Ruslands, where different laws might offer protection. Most of these are probably fairy tales, but you need to believe some made it. The alternative is accepting that this is forever, and that thought makes you consider the noose instead of the road. The Saxon woman backs out the night before your attempt. Can't blame her. She's seen what happens to caught runners. The Irish monk wavers but holds firm. You've both hidden supplies in the barn's rafters, stolen bread hard as rocks, a knife someone died holding, clothes pilfered from the rag pile that might let you pass as poor free folk from a distance. It's pathetic preparation, but it's what you have. The night arrives moonless and clouded. Perfect. You slip your bonds. Weeks of working them loose with spit and blood have finally paid off. The monk does the same. You creep past the sleeping forms of other slaves, and you see the Slavic woman watching. She doesn't raise an alarm. Her eyes say what her voice can't. Go, try. Maybe you'll be the ones who make it. Or maybe she's just glad it's not her risking the torture. The first hours are terrifying freedom. Every sound might be pursuit. Every shadow could hide Magnus with his dogs. You stick to the forests, following a stream you hope leads to the coast. The monk knows some navigation by stars. but clouds hide them. You're walking blind, putting distance between you and hell, praying to any god that might listen to property that dares to steal itself. Dawn comes too soon. You've made maybe 10 miles, nothing, with dogs on your trail. The bread tastes like ash, but you force it down. Your feet already bleed through the rags you've wrapped them in. The monk quotes scripture about deliverance, but his voice shakes. You both know the odds. You both know what waits if you're caught. You keep walking anyway, because stopping means accepting defeat. The dogs find you on the second day. You hear them baying in the distance, getting closer, and something in your chest just breaks. The monk starts praying louder, faster, like words might save you. You consider the knife. Better to die free than live enslaved. But your hands shake too much to use it. The tree line breaks and there's Magnus, smiling like he's found lost toys. They don't kill you immediately. That would be wasteful. Instead, they make you walk back, tied to the horses, stumbling and falling while Magnus discusses your punishment loud enough for you to hear. The hamstringing for sure. Maybe take some fingers. You don't need all 10 to work. Brand your face so everyone knows you're a runner. Or maybe something creative, something that will make others think twice. He's got 3 days to decide, and he wants you to think about it every step back to hell. The other slaves watch your return in silence. No judgment in their eyes. Everyone understands the urge to run. The Slavic woman tends your feet that night, picking out stones and dirt with practiced gentleness. Not today, she whispers, but you're not sure if she means escape or death. The monk hasn't stopped praying since the dogs appeared. You lie in your straw and wait for morning, for Magnus to announce your fate, for another chance that will probably never come. Magnus takes his time with your punishment, savoring 3 days of anticipation like aged wine. When he finally announces it, you almost laugh at the anticlimax. You'll keep your tendons and your fingers. Instead, you're sentenced to the mill. Doesn't sound bad until you see the Irish monk's face go white. The mill, he whispers. May God have mercy. You'll understand soon enough. The mill is where slaves go to die slowly. It's a primitive thing. 2 massive stones, one atop the other, turned by human power since the textile woman won't waste an ox on work slaves can do. 4 thralls push wooden beams in endless circles, grinding barley into flour, hour after hour, day after day, until their bodies simply give out. The average life expectancy for a mill slave? 6 months if you're strong, 3 if you're not. You're yoked to the beam like an animal, thick leather straps cutting into your shoulders and chest. The slave opposite you is a walking corpse, skin stretched over bones, eyes unfocused, moving purely from muscle memory. He doesn't acknowledge your arrival. The other pair consists of a young Frisian who still has some fight in his eyes, and an older woman who wheezes with every step. Round and round you go, pushing the massive stone that weighs more than all of you combined. The first day, you vomit twice from exhaustion. The overseer doesn't let you stop. You learn to puke while walking, adding your bile to the slurry of sweat and blood that makes the floor treacherous. Your feet slip constantly, and falling means the others have to drag your weight along with the stone. They hate you for it at first, then stop caring. Everyone falls eventually. Everyone gets dragged. The mill doesn't stop. Here's what archaeology tells us about Viking Age mills. They were relatively rare and valuable installations. Here's what it doesn't capture: the grooves worn in the floor by thousands of footsteps in the same endless circle. The bloodstains ground into the wood, the way the air tastes like flour dust and despair, coating your lungs until breathing becomes its own labor. You cough constantly, hacking up grey phlegm that might be ground barley or might be pieces of yourself. By the second week, you understand why this is worse than hamstringing. At least crippled slaves get to rest sometimes. Mill slaves work 16-hour days, every day, no exceptions. You eat while walking. Someone holds gruel to your mouth as you push. You piss and shit yourself because stopping isn't allowed. At night, you collapse where you're untied, too exhausted to make it to the barn. Sometimes you wake up still pushing against nothing, your body unable to stop the motion. The Frisian boy breaks first. One morning, he simply stops pushing, stands there slack-jawed while the rest of you struggle with his share of the weight. The overseer beats him, but he doesn't react, doesn't even flinch, just stares at something none of us can see. They drag him away and replace him with a fresh slave within the hour. The mill doesn't stop. You develop a relationship with the stone. You hate it with a passion that keeps you warm when everything else fails. This round, grinding face becomes your entire world. You know every pit in its surface, every imperfection. You dream about it, endless circles even in sleep. Sometimes you talk to it, cursing its weight, begging it to move easier, promising anything if it would just stop for 1 minute. The stone doesn't care. It never stops. The older woman dies on her feet, literally. She's pushing one moment, dead the next, but her body stays upright, carried along by the beam and our momentum. We push our dead companion for half a day before the overseer notices and cuts her loose. Her corpse falls, and we step over it for hours until someone drags it away. You've become so mechanical that a dead body is just another obstacle in your endless circle. Winter in the mill is its own nightmare. No walls, just a roof to keep snow off the stones. Wind cuts through your rags like knives, but at least the constant movement keeps you from freezing solid. Your hands go numb gripping the beam, and you can't feel your feet after the first hour. One slave loses fingers to frostbite. They turn black and fall off like rotten fruit. He keeps pushing. The mill doesn't stop. Here's something historians argue about: whether mill work was assigned as punishment or just another labor allocation. From inside the circle, shuffling through your own waste and the corpses of former partners, the distinction is meaningless. This is torture refined to its purest form. Not dramatic like hot irons or public beatings, just the slow grinding down of human beings until nothing remains but meat that moves in circles. You start seeing things that aren't there. Dead slaves pushing alongside you, your mother calling from outside the circle, the stone growing faces that mock your weakness, the Frisian boy, now your partner after 2 others died, talks constantly to people who don't exist. You'd worry about madness, but sanity seems like a luxury you can't afford. Maybe madness would make this easier. By the 3rd month, you're the senior mill slave. Everyone else has died or been dragged away broken. New faces appear and disappear like snowflakes. You teach them the rhythm without words. Your voice gave out weeks ago. They learn or they don't. They survive or they don't. You keep pushing because stopping means thinking, and thinking means remembering. You used to be human. Your body is failing in ways you didn't know were possible. Joints swollen to twice their size, muscles that tear and never heal, bones grinding against each other with every step. You're 21 years old and move like an ancient. The overseer looks at you sometimes, calculating how much work you have left before you're not worth feeding. Not long now. The mill doesn't stop, but you will, soon. The feast preparations tell you something special is happening. Free folk rushing about. Slaves worked even harder than usual. And whispers of an important visitor, a jarl from the eastern settlements bringing news of successful raids. But what catches your attention is Magnus selecting special attendants for the celebration. Young slaves, healthy ones, cleaned up and given clothes that aren't complete rags. The Slavic woman's eyes go dead when she sees this. She knows. You all know. You're pulled from the mill for this. Your walking corpse body deemed decorative enough once they scrub months of filth away. The washing is its own torture. Cold water and rough brushes on skin more scar than flesh. Your protruding bones mapped by some thrall keeper who tisks at your deterioration. They dress you in a rough tunic that feels like silk after your rags. And suddenly you understand. You're not being cleaned up to serve. You're being prepared. The feast hall fills with important Vikings, their gold arm rings glinting in firelight, their voices loud with mead and boasting. You stand with 5 other selected slaves against the wall, trying to be invisible while knowing invisibility isn't the point. The visiting jarl is old, scarred, recently widowed, the kind of man who might need servants in the afterlife. His eyes scan your group like he's selecting cattle. They linger on you, and your empty stomach somehow finds bile to rise. Here's what the sagas glorify, but archaeology confirms with unsettling frequency. The ritual of slave sacrifice at important funerals wasn't random violence, but carefully orchestrated religious theatre. Ibn Fadlan, the Arab chronicler, described witnessing one in detail. The volunteers, the angel of death with her ritual knife, the specific ways slaves were killed to honor the dead. Historians still argue whether slaves truly volunteered, or if volunteer meant selected and given no choice. The jarl drinks heavily, boasting about raids in lands you've never heard of. Each story ends with counts. How many killed? How many captured? How much silver taken? Your fellow slaves serve in silence while you stand displayed like future grave goods. The Irish monk beside you hasn't stopped praying under his breath. A young Saxon woman shakes so hard her teeth chatter. We all know only one of us might see tomorrow, depending on how the night goes. Then the jarl clutches his chest. His face goes purple, eyes bulging, mead cup crashing to the floor. For a moment, nobody moves. Is this a fit? Too much drink? Then he topples backward, convulsing, foam at his lips. The hall erupts in chaos. Someone screams about poison. Others call for the healer. You and your fellow sacrifices are forgotten in the panic, but you don't dare move. Drawing attention now means certain death. He dies before midnight. Heart gave out. The healer declares. Those suspicious glances fly about poison and curses. The textile woman wails appropriately. He was her cousin, apparently, and his death means good trade connections might die too. But Viking custom is clear. A jarl needs a proper funeral, and proper funerals need sacrifices. The selected slaves are herded to a guarded storage room. Your reprieve was temporary. Tomorrow, you'll help him journey to Valhalla. The night in that storage room is the longest of your life. 6 slaves sitting in darkness, waiting to die. The Saxon girl suggests escape. But where would we go? Dressed in funeral clothes, marked for death. The Irish monk offers last rites to anyone who wants them. To accept, you don't. What god would listen to property praying? Instead, you sit against the wall and think about nothing. It's a skill you've perfected in the mill. Think about nothing, feel nothing, be nothing. Maybe dying will be like that, but permanent. Morning comes with ceremony. They dress you in white tunics, actual white, not the grey-brown of worn cloth. They paint runes on your foreheads with something that smells like blood and ash. The angel of death, a severe woman with steel-grey hair and cold eyes, inspects each sacrifice. She adjusts your collar, straightens your tunic, nods approval. Your acceptable offerings. How wonderful. The funeral procession moves toward the ship burial. They've dragged the longboat inland, filled it with the Jarl's possessions, weapons, gold, food for the journey. His body rests in the center, dressed in his finest clothes, sword across his chest. The free folk chant and wail. Slaves dig the massive grave that will hold ship and corpses alike. You march with your fellow sacrifices, legs moving though your mind has already fled somewhere safer. Here's something the archaeological record shows clearly. Not all sacrifices went willingly. Skeletons found in slave positions often show defensive wounds, signs of struggle, bonds still visible on wrist bones. But struggling means a bad death, slow strangulation instead of quick throat cutting. The angel of death is skilled, but not merciful. You've heard screams from previous funerals that lasted far too long. They start with the animals, horses and dogs to serve the Jarl. Their blood soaks the ground, and the smell makes your empty stomach heave. Next comes your group. The angel of death approaches the Saxon girl first. She's gone somewhere else behind her eyes, swaying slightly, maybe finding peace in madness. The knife is sharp. She barely gasps before falling. One by one, your fellow sacrifices meet their ends. Professional, efficient, their blood pools with the animals, all equal in death. Then something breaks the ceremony. Riders approaching fast, horns blowing alarm, raiders, not returning Vikings but enemies, maybe Danes or Russ, coming for plunder. The funeral transforms into chaos as warriors grab weapons. Women scream, and suddenly staying to properly murder slaves seems less important than defending the settlement. The angel of death hesitates, knife still raised, then runs for safety. You're left standing among corpses, forgotten in white robes soaked with other people's blood. This is your chance, maybe your only chance. While Vikings clash with raiders, while nobody watches the property, you run. Not toward the forest, they'll expect that. Instead, you head for the chaos, grabbing a dead warrior's cloak, smearing mud over the funeral runes. In battle's confusion, one more running figure means nothing. You've learned to be invisible. Now your life depends on it. The raid saves your worthless life, though calling it life feels generous. You stumble through smoke and screaming, past Vikings too busy fighting to notice one muddy slave. Your funeral tunic tears on something, a spear, a fence, who knows? And blessed cold air hits skin that hasn't felt freedom in 3 years. Or is it 4? Time loses meaning when every day is the same hell. You run until your scarred mill slave legs give out, collapsing in a drainage ditch 2 miles from the burning settlement. The smart move would be heading for the deep forest. But smart slaves don't survive. Lucky ones do. So you do the opposite of smart. You head for the coast, toward the same ships and traders that might recognize an escaped thrall. Death by starvation in the woods, or death by recapture at the docks. At least the docks mean a chance, however slim. The collar is your biggest problem. That iron ring marks you as property clearer than any brand. You spend hours with a sharp rock, grinding at the rivet, tearing your neck raw. Blood runs down your chest, mixing with funeral paint and battle mud. Your fingers cramp and bleed, but desperation is excellent motivation. When the rivet finally gives, the collar falls away, and you sob, actually sob, at the absence of its weight. 3 years, maybe 4, and suddenly your neck can move freely. Here's what historians rarely discuss. Successful escape required more than just running. You needed to become someone else entirely. Slaves walked differently, eyes down, shoulders hunched, spoke differently, never first, always deferential, even breathed differently, shallow, trying not to take up space. You practice walking like a free person in that ditch, shoulders back, eyes forward. It feels like wearing an ill-fitting costume. Your body keeps trying to cringe into slave posture. The port town of Hedeby sprawls before you 3 days later. You've survived on puddle water and grass, but you're freeish, which makes hunger taste like victory. Your torn funeral tunic passes for beggar's clothes. The mud-covered funeral runes might be dirt or might be decoration. You practice your story. A farmer's son from the inland settlements, seeking passage to Iceland where your uncle supposedly owns land. It's thin, but thin stories sometimes work when told with confidence. The docks teem with exactly the kind of people who might help or might turn you in for silver. Sailors, merchants, suspicious characters who ask no questions if the price is right. You approach carefully, watching for slave catchers, overseer types, anyone who might recognize the particular kind of damage millwork leaves on a body. Your hands shake, but that could be hunger. Your scars show, but free people have scars too. You're gambling everything on blending in. A Frisian merchant ship needs deck hands. The captain, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, or maybe you're projecting kindness onto anyone who doesn't immediately beat you. Asks few questions. Can you work? Yes. Are you freeman? The lie comes easier than truth. Yes. Do you have passage money? No, but you'll work for it. He looks you over, the scars, the funeral tunic, the way you unconsciously flinch when he moves too quickly, and makes his own calculations. We sail with the tide, he says. Maybe he knows. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe kindness exists even here. But freedom, if you can call this desperate flight freedom, comes with a price, always does. The textile woman has placed a bounty on your head. 20 pieces of silver for your return. 10 if you're brought back damaged but alive. That's serious money, enough to make slave catchers very interested. You hear them asking questions at other ships, describing the mill slave who disappeared during the raid. They get closer each hour. The tide can't come fast enough. Here's something you learn about freedom as an escaped slave. It's not a state, but a constant performance. Every interaction might expose you. Every question could be a trap. You practice your free man voice while hauling cargo, careful not to sound too servile. You train yourself not to automatically defer to every free person. It's exhausting. This constant vigilance, part of you, and this is the sick part, almost misses the simplicity of slavery. At least then you knew exactly where you stood. The ship finally sails as slave catchers reach the neighboring vessel. You're pulling ropes with blistered hands, trying to look like you've done this before. When you see Magnus on the dock, he's scanning the ships, and for one heart-stopping moment, your eyes meet. Recognition flares. He shouts, points, starts running for the harbour master. But your ship is already catching wind, sliding away from shore, and Hedeby's laws about property don't extend to international waters. You're not free, not really. You're an escaped slave on a ship where anyone might turn you in at the next port. Iceland might offer no better life. You could end up enslaved again, possibly worse off than before. The Frisian captain definitely suspects what you are, but needs the labor more than the bounty. You're trading one uncertainty for another, but at least it's your choice. The first real choice you've made in years. That night, as Hedeby disappears into darkness, you touch your neck where the collar sat. The skin is scarred, permanently grooved from the iron's weight. You'll carry that mark forever, along with the mill-twisted spine, the whip scars, the places where hope was beaten out of you and replaced with emptiness. Freedom doesn't erase any of that, but for the first time in 3-4 years, you fall asleep without iron around your neck, and that's something. Maybe not freedom, but something. The waves rock the ship, and you dream, not of mills or whips or corpses, but of somewhere you've never been, Iceland, a place where maybe, possibly, escaped property can become human again. It's probably a fantasy. Most things are, but fantasies kept you alive in the mill, and maybe they'll keep you alive now. The ship sails north, carrying cargo and crew, and one piece of stolen property stealing himself. You close your eyes and, for the first time in memory, choose when to sleep. The waves rock you gently now, so different from that violent first sea voyage that brought you to hell. Your breathing slows as the Frisian ship carries you toward something. Maybe freedom, maybe just a different kind of struggle, but at least it's yours to face. The iron collar is gone, though you still feel its phantom weight. The mill is behind you, though your body carries its scars. You're not the person who was dragged from their burning village. That person died somewhere between the slave market and the feeding trough. But whoever you are now, you're moving toward tomorrow by choice. The stars above are the same ones you couldn't see from the barn, from the mill, from under the weight of ownership. Now they're yours to watch as sleep finally takes you. Real sleep, not the exhausted collapse of the enslaved. Your bones still ache and your scars still pull. But for the first time in years, you don't have to wake at the whip's crack. You can rest until your body decides it's time. Such a small thing, choosing when to wake. Such an impossible luxury. Close your eyes now. Let the ship's gentle motion carry you away from everything you've survived. You've lived through humanity's darkest corners and somehow stayed human enough to run toward hope. That's its own victory. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. It always does. But tonight, you're just another passenger on a ship heading north. Not property, not a thrall, just you, whoever that is now. The ocean doesn't care what you were. The stars don't know you were owned. And in this moment, floating between your past and your future, you're free enough. Sleep now. Dream of Iceland's mountains and grasslands you've never seen. Dream of choosing your own name. Dream of waking because you want to, not because you must. Let the darkness be comfort instead of terror. You've earned this rest. Sweet dreams, survivor. Tomorrow you begin again.